Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Rebel Religion in the News. I'm Jerry O'Lennon, your co-host, along with Pastor Alfredo Romero of Rock of Life Fellowship, and my guest on Thursdays, Brendan DeForest of Redeemer Lutheran Church. So glad you could be with us. This is the show where we take a look at the news of the day and see how it pertains to God in our Christian lives. Thanks so much for being with us. This week, Elon Musk made a very profound statement, I thought. We could talk a little bit about this. He says he was interviewing former President Trump and said that we are at a fork in the road of destiny of civilization, and says that Trump is on the right path towards saving civilization. Mm-hmm. That is a lot, and we need to say something. Elon Musk is no conservative Republican. He wants people to drive electric cars. He's a moderate. He calls himself a moderate Democrat, but says the Democratic Party's gone so far off, and that maybe it's time for people to. He says that Trump is the only way. I mean, but I don't want to necessarily get into politics. What I am interested in is when he says that we're at a fork in the road for the destiny of civilization. That's quite a statement.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Is it true?
Well, real quick. So I remember Musk put out a meme, and it basically said. It was like these stick figures. It was left, extreme right. He was in the middle, and the figure was basically he hasn't moved to the right. Mm-hmm. Is that the left has moved so far to the left that he's kind of whatever you thought Democrat or liberal was, 20, 30 years ago is not the party of today. Yeah. So that's kind of what he's saying. That's the politics for me. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, one of the things that was interesting is a lot of people were up in arms that Elon Musk was even doing this interview saying, oh, this is unfair. And it's like, well, that's kind of the way the First Amendment works. But that is concerning when sometimes even news organizations are saying, well, he shouldn't have that forum because it's unfair that he owns it. But, back when Twitter was owned by those on the left of the aisle, everything was cool.
Of course,
Well, the inconsistency.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, that's the whole thing. I've had problems with people that are upset because Musk interviewed Trump, because some of the news outlets that I saw were saying, this is outrageous that somebody with that platform that has such a big, huge audience, somebody that's so influential like Musk can promote a political candidate. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, hold it.
Yeah.
Bezos, Washington Post, New York Times.
Well, Elon
CNN.
Musk himself, he goes on. He said that he supported Obama, stood in line for 6 hours just to shake Obama's hand when he was running for president in 2000. I guess that was 2008. I guess
wow.
or no,
2008.
Wow, time flies.
Yeah.
He said, so it's not like I'm some sort of dyed-in-the-wool long-term Republican. He calls himself a moderate Democrat. He just says we're at a critical juncture for the country. I don't think young people see it that way. They don't see this as being a critical junction in the country because they don't know any different. This is all they know. And that's what's frightening in some ways. Because as the older generations, you and me, Alfredo, not so much Pastor Brendan DeForest.
As a younger people.
Yes, as
like
you might not relate to it as well.
2014 was maybe more where the fork in the road was for our country.
You think so? Why?
And, well, look, I've read some studies about this, that it was back in 2014, the Obergefell v. Hodges happened in 2015, so that was even before the gay marriage stuff and everything in 2014. Trump was just campaigning or maybe hadn't even announced his campaign, but we knew Obama was on his way out, so that was kind of a critical juncture. Was that exactly a fork in the road for the country? I don't know. So maybe if 2014 was this critical juncture, now we've gone a little bit further, and maybe it is that fork in the road. Certainly.
Yeah. Some people think that that former President Barack Obama is still pulling the strings right now.
Well, there's that famous interview with him where he said, the perfect job would be me as president, but like in the basement, and I'm just kind of pulling the strings of who's ever in charge.
I think he's got that job.
I think he's got that job, yeah. It sure appears like it. Yeah. What is this? Somebody who said this is the third term of Obama and he's going for his fourth. That's just conjecture, but whatever.
Right.
But the interesting thing about what I was reading from the interview is how Trump had basically said, I believe more in God now than I did before. I mean, I'm a believer, he says, basically. And, whatever that means. But I just wanted to see anyone, left, right, middle, wherever, to get in touch with the true Lord, the true Jesus, and become what God calls a true follower of God, a believer.
Yeah.
In Christ as
Yeah,
Savior.
I think if I was disappointed in that interview that Musk had with Trump would be I would like to engage a little bit more on Trump's religious beliefs, because all we really got was Trump tells Musk, "I'm more of a believer in God since the assassination attempt." There was really nothing more. I mean, Musk didn't go into detail. Like if you and I were doing the interview, I think we'd probably say, tell us more about the journey. What were you thinking about? Did you read any scriptures? Did pastors come and talk to you? Well, tell me about your relationship with Christ. Are you baptized? What are your beliefs? What kind of, I would have asked more penetrating questions instead of him just and listen, I mean, the fact that he says that he's closer to God, that this is all a good thing for anybody to be closer to God, no matter what your political affiliation. That is good. This is good.
Yeah.
But I'd like to have learned a little bit more detail. And that's more, makes it more interesting.
The great question would have been, do you believe in your heart and confess your tongue that Jesus Christ is Lord? I mean, that would be the question.
Yeah.
But that's coming from Musk, so
Right.
I pray for him as well.
Right. It would have been nice. Jesus would have been nice to hear whether, because for us, we're Christians and we think that is the way and the truth and the life. But it's unfortunate that we don't have serious discussions on religion when it pertains to our political candidates, which brings up Tim Walz, the vice presidential nominee for the Democrats, the running mate for Kamala Harris. He's Lutheran.
Mm-hmm.
He's from Minnesota, but just about everybody in Minnesota is Lutheran.
That's true, yeah.
It's not unusual.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you're a Lutheran pastor. Mm-hmm. Is this something you're proud of, that you have a Lutheran that's... Well, I mean, that seriously. He is Lutheran.
Right.
But there are two factions in the Lutheran denomination.
Yeah. I mean, there's more than two, but yeah, you've got the LCMS, which we're a part of.
Missouri Synod.
Much more conservative, Missouri Synod. And then the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, which Tim Walz is a part of.
Right.
And that's, it's much... I've even looked up his church. Pilgrim Lutheran Church, I think it is, in wherever, Minnesota. Mm-hmm. And, and
I've been there.
Have you been there?
They've got their
I'm going to write that down.
I've maybe even driven by it when my time's in Minnesota. Anyway, they've got, their affirming social justice initiatives and everything. And but it's funny because the ELCA prides themselves on being this really diverse organization, but statistically, they are the whitest denomination in America. And statistically, they are expected to no longer be a denomination by 2050.
What's that mean, no longer denomination?
Like they will have no more members.
Okay, so they will not be part of the Lutheran Church.
They won't be a church at all. Everybody's going to die by 2050.
Oh, because it's an older generation?
Yeah.
Like
basically.
much older?
Well, Lutherans are known to be the denomination of older folks who like Jell-O.
That's true.
My wife is from Minnesota and she was Lutheran, so was her family.
and I was raised in a Lutheran church, and I remember going to church when I was a young lad, and there were a lot of old people in there. And it's why is that? Why is it that Lutherans older folks gravitate to the Lutheran church?
That is something that I'm trying to figure out as a young people, as you call me.
Mm-hmm. Well, the name sounds older.
Yeah,
that's
true.
Just
Lutheran. It's just back. It's Martin Luther, and it's very traditional, and and when you're from those more conservative areas, and I don't mean politically conservative, but I mean more lifestyle conservative, really. Mm-hmm. Like my wife's family, they were very. They were, for example, like my wife's father. It's Depression era when they were children, and it was very conservative. It was very controlled, very very local, very unit in that city. So he grew up Lutheran. It was interesting. I've been to Lutheran churches before, and if it's a true Lutheran church that praises God and the true God of the Bible, and they believe Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and life, and they have their doctrine right, oh, okay. I'm not, I'm just saying. But unfortunately, here's the point. Here's my point. Whatever people call themselves, like Biden calls himself Catholic, Pelosi calls herself Catholic, Waltz calls himself Lutheran, right? Mm-hmm. Forget the names of the denominations. we are supposed to be known by our fruit. If we're true followers of Christ, we're known by our fruit. Do we follow the Bible? Do we believe that we're for Jesus? Everything he's for, we're for. What he's against, we're against. The proof is kind of like in your walk. And that's the whole point. He can call himself a Lutheran, and any Republican can call themselves a Christian. But if their walk isn't consistent with, Christ, then that's how.
Well, this brings up the whole question: Does a candidate's religion even matter when we're voting, and should it matter? And I know what you're gonna say. No. Wait a minute. Don't laugh. I mean, wait a minute. Give me some respect here. No. I've heard Alfredo say many times he's the Jesus party. He checks off as many Jesus's check boxes as he can. Right. I understand that, but is it necessary to have a religious faith, a belief in God, in order to be a good candidate for president? I've not heard Kamala Harris, or for that matter, Donald Trump, or for that matter, Barack Obama, or a lot of individuals over the last 20 years really talk a lot about their religion. Certainly Hillary Clinton didn't, Donald Trump didn't. Joe Biden really didn't focus too much on his religion. I mean, although he did mention he was Catholic, he did, and so he did. But really, I don't think religion plays the role that it used to play, like even when Clinton, for everything that he did in his life, he did walk around with the Bible. He called himself a Baptist. Ronald Reagan, didn't go to church, but everybody knew he was a Christian, etc. It doesn't seem like it makes a difference to people anymore.
Oh, real quick. President Obama, when he was running, said that he was a Christian. There's a famous interview with George Stephanopoulos. He goes, "Oh, what about your faith?" He goes, "Well, my Muslim faith." And he goes on, and George you mean your Christian faith? He goes, "Yeah, my Christian faith." And then he goes and he starts a church tour, going through churches saying that he was a Christian and he was for marriage between a man and a woman, against gay marriage. He went to the Purpose Driven Life Church in Southern California. I forget the guy's name. Rick Warren, thank you.
Warren, that's what I wanted to talk about. Rick Warren, we're going to take a break. We'll continue talking about religion in the news, and politics in the news, when we come back with part 2. We'll be right back.
Rebel religion in the news. Rebel religion in the news.
Welcome back. I'm Jerry Lennon, Alfredo Romero, Rock of Life Fellowship, and Pastor Brennan DeForest of Redeemer Lutheran Church. Usually in this segment, we turn things over and talk theology, maybe something going on in the church over at Redeemer Lutheran, maybe some lessons that are being taught there, and if there's anything really terribly interesting you want to share with us, what's going on over at Redeemer, or maybe some Bible study things that we could learn from. I love hearing stuff like this because
Pastor Alfredo already set the stage.
I did.
Talking about what's your Christian walk like, and
right.
How's the Spirit working in your life? By saying it, how's it working in the lives of these politicians?
Really, that's true. And you mentioned going into the break, Rick Warren. I remember when he had a sit down with John McCain. And it was really good. McCain was very, very good because he was in a POW camp, and he talked about his faith and how it grew stronger because of what he experienced in Vietnam. It was a wonderful interview.
Yeah, I remember that.
And then I remember Obama had the same opportunity, and he didn't come across as good because it seemed like he didn't have that experience of being challenged. And sometimes we talk about how adversity really builds character and strength. That certainly was the case with McCain. You might not have agreed with him on many of the issues toward the end of his career. You may have agreed with him, but certainly what he went through made him a stronger person. And maybe you could just talk a little bit about that. Have you seen that?
Suffering produces endurance. Endurance produces character. Character produces hope, and hope doesn't put us to shame. So
it does seem like we do everything we can to avoid that. I know that my co-host here, Pastor Alfredo, has gone through a lot of difficult experiences in his life, and he's a great. He's a wonderful man because I've learned he's an inspiration. He lost 5 houses in the Paradise Fire. His family did. His father died in your arms.
Yeah.
And your wife is going through some very difficult times with a neurological problem, and and there's just one thing on top of another, and the adversity builds such character that sometimes I actually feel kind of guilty. I mean, I've had some adversity in my life, and most of it was a direct result of my own immaturity and stupidity. But that's part of it as well.
Yeah.
But maybe you can share some of that.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is it's when you hear people say they have faith in God, or they have a faith, or the thing that I would say is, if I listen to somebody, it's got to be, I'm a follower of Christ, I'm a disciple, I'm a believer. Did somebody come out and say I'm Lutheran? The first thing is, hey, do you believe in God? Yeah, I'm a Baptist, I'm a Lutheran, I'm a Episcopalian. I don't want to be known by a title. It's your walk with Christ. It's how, yes, I'm saved because I believe Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior, and whether I believe it or not, it's true. It just is, and it's about acceptance. Do I accept it? And most people don't. And the reason why is because life is going to happen. Life is tough, whether you're a believer or not, man. No matter how hard you try and how good you try to be, man, life is going to dump on you sometimes. And we've only got two choices. We can go through life with God or without Him. That's it. And it's way better with Him. It gives me victory. It gives me hope. It gives me inspiration. It gives me fortitude, knowing that this world isn't it. This isn't it. This isn't it. It's about the next world. But I'm supposed to walk out my faith in Christ as best as I can while I'm here on this earth. So when I listen to politicians or entertainers or celebrities or sports figures, and they say, well, thank God, I'm like, which God? How is your fruit? What is going on? Because I want to see, how are you walking out life and your challenges when life is great or when life is difficult? How are you walking out your faith? So, I mean, that's kind of what I judge it on.
I was thinking about Tim Waltz, a Lutheran, and he said something. He's going through this situation with his military service where he clearly was not on the up and up. I mean, he seems to have lied about his military record, about being deployed to Iraq, and he got out of it just before that happened. We don't need to repeat everything that happened there. But what strikes me again, as always is the case, is just tell the truth. I mean, would there have been anything wrong, however many years ago that was, where he said, I guess it was about 20 years ago, if he said, no, I did not deploy in Iraq. I resigned my commission or my whatever you do, and he said, I resigned and I decided to do this instead. But he let the lie linger instead of correcting it immediately. If he'd corrected it immediately, he wouldn't be in the fix he's in now.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Walking by the Spirit, Jesus tells us in the Gospel of John that the Spirit will lead you into all truth, including, being truthful in your own life. So, yeah, I mean, that's little, evidence of how the Spirit's working in your own life.
And I actually think that Donald Trump would be well advised to do the same thing. I mean, here's somebody who will let a little, if he had done something wrong with this porn actress, and we don't know, he says he didn't do anything, but if he had, wouldn't it have been better just to say, I had a moment of weakness and I did something I regret, and I apologize and I'm deeply ashamed. Gosh, he'd probably get a lot more votes if he did that, wouldn't he?
Yeah, I mean, there's something about being humble is being able to say, yeah, man, that wasn't me. Like people would ask me about my past, and I go, oh boy.
Oh, I don't ask me.
I don't want to talk about it.
I don't either.
I've done horrible things. But if somebody looks at me now, if I've met somebody I haven't seen like in 25, 30 years, right? Yeah. And they came up to me and they remembered me like who I used to be, I would tell them flat out, I'm not that guy anymore.
Right.
That's not me. And what's the difference? Well, I now live for Christ, not for myself. Because when I lived for myself, I made all kinds of wrong choices. But that's just not me anymore. And that's what God says. We're new creations. We leave the past behind.
You see, that's the kind of in-depth questioning I would like to have heard Elon Musk talk to Donald Trump about. This would have been a nice pivot and say, okay, how has this changed your view on some of the things you did in your life when you were a young man? Do you look back on when you were a young man and have regret and shame and feel badly about the kind of life you lived when you were a young man? That would have been a penetrating, interesting question. Yeah. But that never came. Instead, we just get a very superficial response, which is, I'm closer to God now. I'm more of a believer in God since the shooting. What does that mean? I mean, saying you're a believer in God, not making this comparison, but Satan believes in God. That doesn't mean anything.
The demons know Jesus is Lord.
Right. So that doesn't mean anything. And not that Donald Trump is Satan. We're not saying that. But saying you know God is not the same as saying, I know God.
Okay,
Right.
but here's what you pray for. See, the acknowledgement, that's a beginning. That's seed. I love that. I love the fact he goes, I'm closer to God. He defends religious, whether you like him politically or not, or personally or not, whatever. But let's just use him as an example, though. When he starts out saying, well, I'm atheist, I'm agnostic, and now I believe in God more than ever before, and he says, somebody asked him, who's your more important person in the world? But no, I'm not the most famous, it's Jesus. And he holds up a Bible and he defends religious freedoms. Okay, I'm on board with that. King Cyrus was used in the Bible
absolutely,
to help free the Israelites, right? So here's the thing. Russell Brand starts out as an atheist and now he's a Christian. And I've been watching him for a few years now, and I can see the same walk. I'm searching for something spiritual. It's just got to be something more in this world, he says. And I'm thinking more about God and who he is. And he's talking to religious leaders, and all of a sudden he gets baptized, and now he flats out putting out videos going, since I've turned my life over to Jesus, I realize it's not about me.
As you said that, I started thinking, should a politician really do that? I mean, if Donald Trump came out and started talking more about his relationship with Christ, if he's been transformed, is that a case of perhaps then, I'll ask the pastor, is that a case perhaps where you're using God's name in vain to get votes? And it could be construed as that. Here's Donald Trump talking about his relationship with Jesus, and he's born again, and the Holy Spirit is in him. He's just using God in order to get votes.
I've seen a lot of politicians, when it comes to election seasons, finally find a relationship with God.
Well, that's the point. So I'm going back and forth on this. Maybe I would like to have heard more from Trump's journey toward Christ, but then again, if you do that, there's going to be people who say he's just using Christ, and they might be right.
And yet, also newer believers, younger Christians, if we can call them that, or if you want to call them that, they tend to have more fire, more vigor for the Lord and for confessing Him.
Yeah.
And so,
True.
I don't want to take that away from him or anybody if they've entered this election season and it's maybe increased their faith. Wow, hey, go for it. The rhetoric on the other side is going to be awful, the separation of church and state and whatever, which has its own meaning.
And I wish the Democrats used to at least talk about God in their platform. I don't think the word
Kennedy.
God is even mentioned in the platform.
Kennedy talked about his Catholic faith. I'm not worried about it. If you just read the Bible directly, if you know the Bible at all, Jesus wasn't worried about the ones that were getting to a point where they started to believe and were listening to him. He was more upset about the hypocrites, the ones that would say one thing and do another. And that's very obvious. I mean, if you're a Christian, a true believer in Christ, you know people by their fruit, right? So somebody that says, hey, I'm a Christian, I believe in God, but then they support things like abortion or sexual morality, or they believe in something that's counter to what God says, then that's the hypocritical part. How can you call yourself a Christian and not support the things that God supports?
One of the worries I have with that, and we only have about a minute and a half left in the show. One of the things one of the things that worry about that is that there's so many young people who just don't know.
No.
There are people who really believe that an abortion is merely an operation. It's just a procedure, and there's nothing involved in it than that. And so their hearts might be in the right place, but they just their minds are not understanding, what's at hand here.
So what do we do?
God says, I have two thoughts. God says that He won't be mocked, and so I thank the Lord that He's the judge and not me, and He's the one who looks at everybody's heart. I'm also thinking of that parable in Mark, the seed, it grows, we know not how. And so young people or whomever, the word is going to impact them somehow if they hear it, and it's going to grow. And if that, means they've realized their sins and their ignorance about abortion or sexual immorality or whatever, thanks be to God.
Pastor Brendan DeForest of Redeemer Lutheran Church, 10 o'clock service time on Sunday morning over on Moss Avenue. And, of course, Alfredo Romero, Rock of Life Fellowship, also 10 o'clock service time. You can find them online. Thanks for joining us, everybody, for Rebel, Religion in the News. Thanks so much, everybody. Take good care.
Rebel religion in the news.